The Swedish housing crisis has brought down the Prime Minister. Stephen Löfven was given a vote of no confidence last week. Today he resigned. His resignation means that there won't be an automatic snap election, but from what I can tell, it still seems very likely that Sweden will end up having an early election over this. Now, the experts are saying that Sweden has the worst housing crisis of any Western nation, one of the worst in the whole world, and the Libyan housing crisis was one of the main catalysts for the war in Libya. The Muslim Brotherhood and U.S. State Department assets used the housing crisis to get violent rioting going, and that rioting was turned into a total war. So a housing crisis is pretty serious stuff. So a big part of what's going on right now goes back to the election of September 2018, which I had YouTube videos about that election and about the aftermath. And so you had the Red-Green Alliance, which had been in power, which is the Social Democrats, the Green Party, and the Left Party. The Left Party is the former Communist Party of Sweden. They rebranded. Then you had the Alliance. The Alliance was four moderate parties: the Moderate Party, the Christian Democrats, the Liberal Party, and the Center Party. And then you have the Swedish Democrats, which are another moderate party, but they take the strongest stance on immigration. And so the Swedish media calls them far right, extreme, all this other stuff. And the media says that no one else is allowed to coalition with the Swedish Democrats because they're too far to the right. But Sweden only has left-wing and moderate parties. There is no Swedish right wing. Now, the obvious coalition after September of 2018 was for the four parties of the alliance to coalition with the Swedish Democrats. Then they would have had a moderate ruling coalition that represented 60% of voters. Instead, the Liberal Party and the Center Party broke rank and sided with the far-left Red-Green Alliance. And it was reported in the Swedish media at the time that the Social Democrats promised to make concessions on housing regulations to win the support for the Liberal Party and the Center Party. Of course, what people are saying now is at the same time they were telling the former Communist Party, don't worry, we don't really mean it. We're not actually going to do anything. Well, that's all come to a head now. So I'm going to try to briefly explain the Swedish housing crisis. So essentially, if you're renting in Sweden, for I guess the majority of people, your rent is determined in a collective bargaining agreement between a tenant association and the landlord. Then there's price caps, and I guess a large majority of all rent in Sweden has a price cap on it. And because of this, since at least the mid-90s, developers have just stopped making affordable housing because there's no money in it. And several years ago, the Swedish government started subsidizing the building of affordable units, but then at the same time, they opened the doors to huge numbers of 18-year-old Iraqis and young males from Afghanistan and North Africa. And then that just made the situation worse. What the Swedish media is saying right now, and this sounds unbelievable, if you live in Sweden, post a comment and tell me what's really going on. The Local, a major Swedish media outlet, is saying that if you want your first apartment, like you're trying to move out of mom and dad's house, there's an average wait of 9 years. 9 years to get an apartment right now. I mean, that doesn't even sound believable. That's insane. And so some of the things going on, and of course I've seen this in Washington, D.C., and everybody talks about it in San Francisco, where you have a huge number of young people packed into one rental house. And then another thing that's going on in Sweden is if you have an apartment, you're not supposed to be allowed to sublease it for a higher rent. This is what they're calling a black market secondhand lease, but apparently it's become super common. And so people who have one of these apartments already and don't need it anymore, they're just subleasing it for more money. Now, the experts are predicting that if Sweden just completely removed all the price caps, the average rent across the board would surge by 50%, which would basically be another crisis in and of itself. But what the moderate parties are asking for is to let developers make new units that don't have these price caps, or at least have higher price caps, so it's going to be profitable enough to motivate people to go and build more apartment buildings. Another thing they're talking about in the Swedish media is companies can't recruit people from other parts of Sweden. So if you've got a large business or a factory or something, you can really only hire people in the immediate area because you can't recruit people from the other side of Sweden. There's nowhere for them to live. Companies are better off leaving Sweden for a foreign nation so they can recruit better employees. So this really is a crazy situation. And of course, it's all brought about from Marxist scheming to make everything fair and create equality among the population. And now it's all blowing up in their face. All right, I have some other recent videos you should check out. I just made one about the U.S. government's report on UFOs. I have a video last month about the history of the witchcraft tribunals and how it relates to modern day. Now, I know that sounds like clickbait, UFOs and witches, but I assure you it is grade A content. All right, click the like button, post a comment below, tell me what you think about this, and click the subscribe button. New video every few days.